I was actually watching the most recent episode of Watching the Hawks, which, by the way, for anyone that's not aware, is a wonderfully underrated show on RT America. It's actually some fantastic programming, great content. It's very informative, great opinions. It really.
Yeah, we were just talking actually. If you like foreign policy and your least favorite part about the show Rising is Sagar, you would love Watching the Hawks.
Yeah, it needs to be more widely seen among kind of like the breadtube space. It's not really discovered, in my opinion. But yeah, guys, check that out if you haven't. But anyway, in the most recent episode, you guys are actually having a fascinating conversation about automation and especially the increasing prominence of social robots, which you described as like a superpowered Alexa. It's more than just a disembodied voice. It actually is full body humanist, whatever robot. And the conversation that you guys were having, your guest and co-host, it was kind of about these like more sci-fi possibilities of AI tech gone wrong, what could happen when AI becomes sentient and all that stuff. But what I'm more concerned about, at least in the interim and until we get to that point, is all these uber enhanced AI technologies and the potential for mass data mining, facial and biological recognition databases, all of which could, easily be sold off to the highest bidder.
Or and to create open air prisons.
Yeah. And all of these things could lead to equally dystopian possibilities as, killer sex robots or whatever. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that and the increasing, data collection state of everything.
Well, Edward Snowden obviously, showed us just how far the U.S. government and other governments around the world are willing to go to know everything about what we do online. For some reason, it hasn't stopped as much terrorism that we know of, which is always interesting. But the government's going to be incredibly invasive, and that's where it really falls on us, the people, to be able to kind of make sure we keep them in check as best we can with the limited amount of power that we have. Where do I think it's going to go? It's like the Spider-Man quote: with great power comes great responsibility. And I think that it's only going to exponentially get larger and larger and larger. I mean, it's kind of funny to me when people talk about, they can track us or they can see what I'm doing and all that kind of thing. Or what was the big rumor? Oh, the vaccinations, we're going to have implants that could track us around. Well, we're tracked by our cell phones every day of our lives. They keep a very, long running log of everywhere we go, everywhere we do, every credit card we use. So really you have to kind of not accept the fact that no matter what you do, unless you're completely off the grid, you're going to leave a signature. You're going to leave an imprint. There's not much you can do about that in today's day and age. So I believe what people have to do is they have to hold their governments accountable, and they have to hold the elected officials accountable for that. Now, how do we do that in today's day and age? That's another conundrum and a mystery we're going to have to face. That's electing the right people. That's getting behind anybody but Democrats and Republicans to a certain degree, and really pushing for candidates that will ultimately tell us the truth about what's going on, or that ultimately will fight for what we elected them to do, and not kind of just make the ever standard campaign trail of promises that are always seem to be broken the moment they get into office.
Yeah, and we can get into some of those broken promises, I'm sure. But to stay on the more dystopian kind of horrifying tone for a moment, I think you guys also covered this on your show. And it kind of makes sense, right? So in Nevada, there's talk of these innovation zones where they're going to be run on cryptocurrency. The governor's getting behind it, and to some degree, if you compartmentalize everything else, you do understand that Nevada's been economically devastated because tourism has hit a standstill. Much of Nevada's economy is concentrated into the Las Vegas area, so the governor is trying to make up for lost, income, and naturally he's, looking to billionaires, because that's what happens in this country. And so he's decided that, as long as you can put, $250 million down and promise $1 billion over the next however many years, then you can basically create your own government. And this just sounds horrifying to me, right? Like if Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are getting into a room and now they're the president. I mean, this is some of the most horrifying things. And you actually on your show, I believe, observed that, this could lead to 20, 30 years indentured servitude, slavery, quite simply because they would just guise it under the fact that, they owe money, they can't leave. We talked about facial recognition, they'll know as soon as you try and leave. Oh, sorry, you're not allowed to leave until you've paid off your debt, right? This idea of debt, which would make it all justified, whatever horror these people were experiencing.
I think I said it on the show. It reminded me a lot of if you went further enough back in the Alien timeline, it's like, this is how Wayland Yutani got started. This is, the moment that cities and counties and states for as long as we can remember, and the federal government for that matter, with federal contracts, they've been giving tax breaks and just basically handing over the keys to cities for as far back as we can remember, when it comes to big corporations moving in under the promise of jobs and things like that. But when you start saying that, yes, this corporation will have the same power as a county if it owns this much land in the state, and that raises a host of really disturbing questions, because at the end of the day, how do the people have power within that county? And as you mentioned, when I kind of got into the indentured servitude aspect of that conversation on Hawks, it really became this idea, well, how it's going to work. I mean, we even kind of saw it prophesized in the movie that came out last year about the young black man who was working in the telemarketing service. I can't remember the name of it.
The Boots Riley film.
Boots Riley's film, yeah. And it kind of got into that idea that, what's going to happen when, okay, I'm going to go to work for, let's say, Walmart in Nevada or other states that may adopt this principle, but Walmart has the same power as a county. Okay, well, that means they're going to have their own, county sheriffs, county security. All right, well, they're going to give me this great, free, cheap place to live while I work for them. I mean, Walmart is a great example because they do everything they can to make sure that their employees are only spending their money at Walmart, or, they don't let them leave. A lot of them, from what I remember, don't let them leave the grounds to go on lunch break or anything like that. You got to go and shop within the store to get your food, or bring your food from home if you have time to do that. But at the end of the day, they want to just consolidate and kind of create this money loop.
Kind of harkens back to the 1800s, right? With the what was those boss towns, where you get company dollars, and that was obviously outlawed, but we're almost regressing back to a Gilded Age kind of time period.
We truly are. And why are we seeing that? Well, because all of the money is flowing upwards. When you create robber barons that we've created, and look, it's not, I'll probably get flamed like hell for saying this, but I don't think anyone wakes up and says, I want to start a business so I can rule the world, or I want to have outlandish power and twirl my evil mustache and say, how can I fuck over people as much as I can? But I think what you're seeing is an addiction to money.
Yeah.
I've been very candid about, I spent 10 years as an alcoholic in my life, and thankfully got into recovery and beat that. Well, and no longer an alcoholic, but when you can recognize patterns and things. And what I see in a lot of the CEOs or a lot of the people running corporations or your Wall Street bankers, things of that nature, you see this addiction to money that kind of overrides everything else. And so that's where you suddenly have them, putting so much pressure on states that states are willing to say, hey, we'll give you the same power as a county government.
Well, it's the logical conclusion of this incredible empowerment of corporate America and of multinational corporations in general. I mean, obviously, it's kind of this dystopian possibility or nightmare that I always think about. It's like, at what point will the corporations be so big, so multinational, that they will just say no to the government, to regulations, or
they already have though. They already have though. Look at what happened in California. They said no. They changed the law after they put $200 million fucking dollars into it, and they're about to do the same thing in Massachusetts.
Yep.
And honestly,
they already they don't even have to say no, because when you have to also, what people also don't realize, because we get so kind of caught up in the left-right fight, that, as many have said before, and I've seen, and my father's seen personally, the same companies give roughly the same amount of money to both parties. Yeah. Because then it doesn't mean that every single Democrat who gets elected or every single Republican who gets elected is going to be, totally in bed with as an individual with that money, but their party is, because their party is never going to give up that spigot. Look, as long as we have the system of currency and the way it's being run, you're always going to see this. And if you go back in time, really, is it any that different than the feudal system we saw, in England and things like that? It really is. And then that's just kind of always been that progression. I think that our technology and that our freedom to buy things has kind of diluted that over the years, and it's an ebb and flow, and sometimes we have a lot more freedom, sometimes we don't, but until we figure out a new way of I guess, for lack of a better term, organizing society, we're kind of stuck with this. and until we get some great minds and really get some good people, doesn't necessarily mean they have to be, university minds, but until we really get some really dynamic people and they to think a new way of doing things, like, for all of their flaws, you still have, you had a pocket of people at the beginning of this country that said, hey, there might be a better way to do it than the feudal system. Let's try that. Let's go back to what Plato and Socrates were talking about, and maybe bring back some of the democracy elements that we've been lacking over the years. Until we see that again, that spark of real cultural and significant change, we're going to be kind of stuck into variations of this feudal system that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's an absolutely prescient diagnosis for sure. Just to go back to AI a little bit, I wanted to get your opinion on our military's increased use of AI-powered war machines, and especially, I'm concerned that it's going to massively decrease the visibility of our foreign policy here in America to those of us that are domestic. Obviously, it's a good thing that American troops won't be being slaughtered for no reason, but when people aren't coming home, maimed or with mental illness, or aren't coming home, at all because they're not even being shipped over, it's much less visible to our society, the true consequences and effect of war. And I'm just wondering, what is the state of the anti-war movement here in America when all of our imperialist foreign policy is being carried out by drones and automated tech? And especially since the media won't turn an eye towards these stories. We recently saw the New York Times completely cut their war reporting. It's a pretty common trend. Just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, my thoughts are this, is that it kind of falls in, as you're saying, into that classic mode of our government learned their lesson from Vietnam. You don't show the body bag. You keep the media into a certain amount of control, or you don't allow them to see the body bags come home. Because when people see the body bags come home and there's a draft, then suddenly the war hits your neighborhood, as opposed to being something on TV. I think that with AI, I think you're very correct in that it allows, and it also kind of, again, it's how many generals sit in a room and say, well, casualties are casualties, they're part of war. How many defense contractors sit in the boardroom and realize, or the people working in the factories and say, wow, we're creating, weapons that kill massive amounts of people on a daily basis, and that's how I get my paycheck. How do I look myself in the mirror every day? By creating AI technology, that kind of even insulates them a little bit more. Well, the AI made the decision. The AI, they always kind of case it in that kind of smart weapon thing. No, the less civilian casualties because the computer knows exactly who to hit. Well, what if who you're hitting isn't necessarily the bad guy? Yeah, like 90% of drone strikes kill civilians, I think. And even then, it's like, and even go to like, okay, let's say you do see, you are targeting the right person and no civilians get killed, but then you get into the moral quandary of, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right? Yeah. So, then that there creates that element too. And so what AI does is it kind of gives more of those barriers and more of those kind of things to allow people to kind of, oh, it's not that bad, oh, no, it's way over there, or, oh, I'm so detached from it. But as we've found, even with drones, as we found, they still create a level of PTSD when you hear about the drone jockeys in the trailers in the middle of New Mexico and Arizona, hitting a button all day, blowing people up, 12 hours a day, 8 hours a day, and they're coming out with a massive amount of PTSD. Because at the end of the day, it's never going to be a computer game. It's not Call of Duty. It is lives that you're snuffing out with every push of a button, or whether it's an programmed AI pushing that button. But look, let's be real. AI is still created by human beings at the end of the day. Yeah. It's not an entity that's separate from us. We created it. And so it's going to have our flaws built into it because
just look at the Facebook quote unquote algorithm. Oh, it's just the algorithm, right? You can see all of these human cultural imperfections that are so obviously and so ingrained in our culture and our ideology that it's passed on to the code subconsciously.
Yeah,
well, we saw that with facial recognition technology too, where they did that study, and it was one of those weird things where all the programmers were Caucasian, so that the AI had a really good at recognizing Caucasian faces, but anything other than that, it totally shit the bed.
Yeah, and I was talking recently, or a couple months ago, rather, with a congressional candidate, Mia Mason, who was a veteran. I think she was in the Marines, maybe, and she was telling me that something that's a prototype, at least, is like literal like RoboCop or like Chappie style robots that are going to be like roaming the streets of our occupied countries. And yeah, of course you're going to run into problems like that with facial recognition when they're programmed by, Caucasian people with this bias. And then you send them to the Middle East or like, of course, disaster after disaster is only going to result in complete destruction.
With the cold precision of artificial intelligence and no human empathy at all. No human empathy at all. And that's my, one of my concerns, right? Because, through all the derangement that, and through all of the, lenses that, people view war when they're there, and there's, so much ideology and so much, distortion of reality and what you're doing, and if there's still always that human element, right? Like, if you're a human being and you have to look at a 7-year-old kid, are you going to shoot him? I hope not, man. I hope not. And AI is not going to make that choice. That 7-year-old kid's not going to make it. So, it completely removes that. It's like it's this cold sterility that I think we have to be really afraid of.
I agree. It reminds me, I think it reminds me every innovation that society has had. And then it's important to remember this too, is that as we get really into this dystopian nightmare that we're describing, that look, for every person who's making a bomb that, a nuclear bomb that can be put into a suitcase, Larry King said this, and I passed away recently. Yeah. He said, like, we have to remember that in life, in this great, wondrous, mysterious thing we call life, and in society, for every person making a suitcase bomb that could kill 100,000 people, there's also someone working on a cure for cancer. Yeah. And sometimes those technologies overlap. It's really, it always, no matter what we do, it's always going to come circling back around to us, and you and I and all of us. It always is going to come back to that human element, no matter how detached we get. And ultimately, it's got to be on us to shepherd our advancement of technology in a way that is meant for the good of people. I think that look, the internet is an incredibly powerful thing that's allowed everyone on this earth to communicate with each other in a microsecond. Yeah. Is it being used for bad? Yes. Is it being used for good? Yes. So ultimately, again, that responsibility falls back on us to be diligent in how we use our technology and how we allow technology to be used by our governments and by our leaders and by the people that we've put in charge. And if they're using it the wrong way, that's on us.